Hey everyone, hi, welcome back to my channel. So what are we doing today? We are talking all about libraries. Now, not the public library that has books for you to access for free, hopefully, but we're talking mostly about personal libraries. There has been a conversation about book buying and libraries and your personal library that has been going around on BookTube for quite a while, and I really wanted to have some solid thinking, some actual thoughts nailed down about my personal library and what my personal library means to me and how I feel about my library in my home. I wanted to have a structured conversation, so I have questions here on my computer. Editing Shelly is gonna help. I haven't seen her in a while, so I said, come on, Editing Shelly, come back and read the questions for me. Hopefully she won't be too annoyed. We will see as this video progresses. But I wanted to have some sort of structure to the conversation, and so I put together these lists of questions. You could turn it into a tag if you wanted to turn it into a tag. Mostly I'm doing this for me. So if some of the wording is super repetitive, just know that these questions were for me to answer and not necessarily for the world at large. But hear me out. So if you want to think about your personal library, I would encourage you to go through the questions and just formulate answers in your mind. Or if you want to share, I would highly encourage you to share in the comments. I love the comment section in my videos because you all have such wonderful input and such thoughtful responses to the things that either I'm talking about or things that I bring up or things that you all bring up on your own. You come up with these wonderful comments. Or if you make BookTube videos and you want to talk about your library in some kind of structured way, then you're welcome to use these prompts in order to help you structure your conversation around your personal library. Gosh, that was quite the preamble. But I wanted to also say that I got these questions. They were based off of two websites. One of them was LibraryThing Forum, a forum on the website LibraryThing, and the other one is an article called on Book Riot called Personal Library. And what I liked about the article from Book Riot is that they started by asking questions about the process of building a personal library. So I like that and the way that people go about it, because we all go about things a little bit differently, even if it's within the same hobby, like book buying, book reading, and creating personal libraries of our own. And then the LibraryThing Forum just had some general questions that I kind of stuck in here and there to help me, again, structure my conversation. Okay, preamble over. We're done with the preamble. We're gonna get to the questions, all right? So I'm gonna, Editing Shelly, do your thing. Filming Shelly is putting Editing Shelly in a corner and said that she can only read these questions. So I'm following the brief and I'm just reading these questions as Editing Shelly. So question number 1, do you have some books around, or do you think of yourself as having a collection or personal library? If you would have asked me this question a year ago, I would have said that I have a collection of books and I also have some books around. The collections of books, because there are multiple little collections of books, they are oversized art books. They are our Tolkien collection. I have a whole video about my Tolkien collection. I'll leave that link down below. And then we have a collection of photograph books, photography books of famous photographers. So I have these 3 collections of books, and then I had books lying around. So books that I had intended to get to eventually, or books that I had read in college that were on my shelves, again, before I started BookTube. And then, because here's what my thought was. I'll back it up with a thought. I saw my public library as my library, my personal library. I conflated the two in my mind before BookTube, and particularly before the pandemic. Because the library is so open and available to me and it's so close to me, my public library, I actually thought of them as kind of holding all of the books that I wanted to read. The classics, the mysteries, the contemporary books. The library was essentially my library, but I just had to go to the library to access it. Then the pandemic hit and I started scouring my shelves for books to read, and I started to really settle into my collection of books, my personal library, because my public library was closed to me and everyone else. So I started to understand and value the personal library that I had, and I wanted to start building it. Now, if you fast forward, a year later after the pandemic, a year and a half after the pandemic, I started my BookTube channel. And then I really saw the value in having a personal library. I joined the ranks of a whole bunch of people who not only take a ton of pride in their personal library, but they go to great lengths to develop it, to cull it, to make it reflect them as a reader, which is so cool. And so I've really kind of changed the way that I thought about my personal library from books, just like books that I own, collections of books that I own, to the transformation of me and my library. My library is Rachelle Swearingen's library, which I love. What does a collection or personal library mean to you? Collection and personal library actually mean something quite different. Collection is a set of books that I think of that they go together. There's sections of my personal library that go together, and they might not be touched or I might not want to read them right away, but they have their own little section, and again, they go together. So I think of that as my Tolkien collection of books, my art books, they go together. I don't quite touch them as much as I want to, but I do dig through them several times a year. And then the photography collection is specifically my husband's collection because he's a photographer. Now, my personal library are all of the books that are outside of those collections, or we could say those collections are little subsets inside of my personal library, little pods inside of my personal library. But my personal library is what you see behind me, as well as other books on my shelf. And the weird thing is that my library is mixed with Ted's library. So books that I might not necessarily feel anything about, my husband feels quite a bit about. And all of the children's books, though they are my children's books, as in like my two children, they own those books, but those are also my books because some of those books are really special and significant to me. What is your personal library for? My personal library is for enjoyment and personal growth. Things that I'm interested in, things that I want to read. My library definitely reflects what I personally want to read and dig into. And it probably reflects like the most current version of myself because I have bought a lot of books currently. However, for a lot of you are translators. I think about the book critics here on BookTube like Steve Donahue and Hannah from Hannah's Books, who might use their personal library as a reference section to go in and look through when more contemporary works that these reviewers are reviewing might go back and reference Homer or Ovid. And so I would imagine that some people's personal libraries are tools for them. I think of my personal library less as a tool and more for enjoyment or pleasure. Where is your personal library? Is it contained to one room, one shelf, or is it spread out throughout the house? My books are spread all throughout the house. My books are like here, there, and everywhere. I will try and show some pictures. So I have a lot of my books behind me, which I am filming in my guest room. And so these are, the books in here are my guests will enjoy whenever they don my house next. But I also have books in the family room. My husband has a makeshift photography studio here in our house, and there are his photography books in his photography studio. My children have kids' books in their children's room. So books are definitely more of a spread out situation in my house. How many books make up your personal library? Ballpark guess, I think I own about 600 books. How do you organize your books? My organization for my library is actually quite hectic right now. At the top shelf that you can't see on this attaché, on the top shelf are books that I've read. Over here I have a small section of books that I haven't read. I'll try and get you some pictures so that you guys get an idea of what I've read and not read and how books are organized. I was on a small kick and I tried to organize my books based off of the publisher, much like Jack from the Rambling Raconteur. He organizes his books based off publisher. I also have tried to organize my books based on the last name of the author. that doesn't quite work out because I have books of all different types of genres and categories. So, you know, do the art books stay in the same section, but do we organize them based off of author? I don't know. I should not have all of these organization questions as the librarian, and yet I do. But basically, there really isn't an organization to my book, except for I bought a stack of books and I put them right behind me, which is totally true. I have a stack of books behind me. So I need to figure out some sort of organization system, and I'm wondering, how do you all organize your books? Please tell me. Do you keep track of your personal library? If so, how? I don't keep track of my personal library in any way, but I would be really curious to know if you all do. How do you decide to add a book to your personal library? Right now, my process for adding a book to my personal library, I go through a series of questions. Do I want it? Where have I heard this from? Is it a classic that I feel like I want or need to read? Should read, though I don't like the word should. I also just think about, do I want to read this right now? Like, will I have the desire to pick this up basically immediately? And if the answer is yes to those questions, then usually I'll buy the book. Also, how expensive is it? Because that's a really important question for my library as well. I am super cheap. I am super frugal when it comes to adding books to my library. When it's time to cull your personal library, how do you decide what stays and what goes? You know, when I learned how to cull in library school, when I was in library school, we were taught that you have to, you know, pull the data, and then you can sort the data based on how many times that book has been checked out. You know, you look at your books based on condition. You don't want books that are raggedy or falling apart in your library. You want your library to be in really good condition and really inviting to patrons to check out those books. For my personal library, the process is a lot more chaotic. I sort of look around my house in a very chaotic fashion and think, does that book spark joy? Yes, the term that Marie Kondo, the famous organizational person, the lady who organizes everything, had coined. So I look at the book and I think, does that spark joy? Do I want to read it again? How do I feel when I look or touch the book? I also look at condition and, you know, very haphazardly, I grab the books that I don't want anymore. I put them in a pile. I double check with my husband usually to make sure that they aren't his books and that he doesn't want to read them. And if everything is in the clear, then I make a donation, whether that donation be at my free little library or at the local secondhand store. Does your personal library have books you haven't read or don't plan to read? What do you think about the idea of a zero TBR? Yes, I have a whole bunch of books that I haven't read and that I would love to get to soon. I always jokingly say that soon in booktube land it means in 5 years or less. And that is true with my personal library. Now, when it comes to books that I may not read, yes, there are books that I do not plan to read cover to cover because they are reference books, they are art books, they're photography books, a lot of those special collection books. I don't plan on reading those books cover to cover. But I don't ever aspire to have what I would call a zero TBR. I learned about this term here on BookTube, a zero to be read list, which means that every book in your library is representative of a book that you have read. You have read everything in your library, which I never really thought about before, and I never have, I've never strove to accomplish, which is interesting because some people, they feel the weight of their TBR, their to be read list, their unread books staring at them. And some people really don't like the imbalance of unread books to read books. And that relationship I am really interested in, you know. So I really want to know, how do you feel about your unread books in your library? Right now, I did a brief count. I have about 150 books that I want to read. And as of right now, I'm okay with that. I would love the idea of a zero TBR. The idea sounds so beautiful. To look around at your house and to look at every book and know that you've read it is a wonderful and glorious idea. I just don't know if I'm that kind of person. And as of right now, I have no ambitions to get down to a zero TBR. And on top of that, I don't know what the number is of unread books in my library that is going to make me uncomfortable enough where I feel like I must read the books off my shelf, or that I don't want to, purchase any more books to add to this growing number of books that I want to read and yet haven't. So I want to know what you all think about this zero TBR concept, or having books in your library that you don't intend to read or may not want to read and yet still keeping them. Because I have books like that live in my library that I don't really plan on reading cover to cover. So I'd be curious to know what you all think. And how do you feel about your personal library, or how do you feel towards your personal library? So this last question about how do you feel about, or how do you feel towards your library, I am really interested in, because I feel like the reason why people start 100 book challenges, the reason why people aspire to do a zero TBR in their house, or they do these challenges, they put these parameters on their spending. The reason why most of us do that is because this discomfort that comes from a library that's unread. I think of my library as something that's growing and changing, and the form of my library is often taking different shapes depending on how many books I'm reading off my shelves, how many books I'm bringing into my library, and how many books I'm kicking out the door and donating to my local thrift store or free little libraries. So I feel like my library is constantly in flux, and it's this living, breathing thing. And in that way, I hope that I continue to read books off of my shelves. I hope to add to the books off of my shelves as long as it doesn't get too overwhelming. Right now, my shelf space hasn't been fully booked to capacity, so I don't mind buying more books. I do wonder, though, if I'm going to get to the point where I don't feel great about the books on my shelves, where perhaps I might develop a contentious relationship with everything that I own, or the books that I own, and maybe they'll start to represent books that I haven't read for far too long. But right now I haven't hit that milestone yet in my feelings, and I don't really want to. I want to continue to have a healthy, happy relationship towards my library, and that means that I have to check in with my library and my feelings about my library often enough to make sure that I'm not developing any negative attitudes towards my books. I want to know how you feel about your personal library, whether it be the library that is in your home, in your apartment, in your bedroom, or on a single shelf in your house. How do you feel about those books? If you have more complicated feelings towards your unread books or the books in your home, I would love for you to explore and share them with me. I'm just so nosy. I just want to know. And I also want to know the answers to all these questions from every single one of you. I want to know about your feelings towards your personal library. That is it for me. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed sort of touring my library. I hope I got some really beautiful footage to kind of put in for you all to see, but really that's it for me. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you all in my next one. Bye guys.